thank you for having me. Whenever I get up to do one of these things, I'm thinking, how did I get here? You know, it's like David Byrne, right? This is not my beautiful wife. This is not my. But and I think of myself actually as an accidental activist, because I never ever would have guessed that my life would lead me to being here in front of you. It started out several years ago. I'm in a book club, and one of the members of our book club is a federal public defender in Maryland. And several years ago, he mentioned that there was this hotshot civil rights lawyer who was going to be giving a presentation at the Pratt. Can you guys hear me back there?
Can you use a mic, please? Because that for the recording.
Is
that a mic right there? It's not.
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
All right, I'll try and do better. Anyway, and he mentioned that there's this lawyer who was going to be giving a talk at the Pratt, and the lawyer turned out to be Brian Stevenson, and this is when he was on his the book tour for Just Mercy, and which is I'm assuming many people, at least in this room, have probably read. It's a life-altering book, even for people of my age, and I can't recommend it highly enough. In any case, during the course of his book talk, Brian mentioned that EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative, had just completed the first iteration of its report on lynching in America, and that's available over here if you haven't seen it and want it. And one of the things that he mentioned about this research that they had done, they had set out to document all of the racial terror lynchings that they could find in the United States. And at that time, they had documented, I think, about 4,500. And I was stunned. I mean, I was totally stunned, not just by the scale, but of the depth of the depravity of these murders. I mean, these were grotesque, sadistic, public displays, humiliating the victims, and basically asserting and enforcing white supremacy. And it was very disturbing. And when he was talking about this report, he mentioned that the first report, the first iteration, really concentrated on the 11 Confederate states and Kentucky. Those are the 12 states that had the lion's share of these murders. And so I thought, well, someone should be doing this in Maryland. And I thought, well, I'm a filmmaker, and I thought I'd like to find out who's doing this, because it would be an interesting story, I think, to tell, and one that needs to be told. And it speaks mostly to my failures as a researcher, that I couldn't find anyone who was doing the work. There were people who were doing the work. It was just I couldn't find them. So in any case, we got together. EJI at that time was starting its work of community remembrance projects, and those are the soil collections and historic marker installations, to bring light to this history that had been, ignored or marginalized or minimized for so long. It occurred to me at some point as I was doing this work that, there are two features of American exceptionalism that we don't really talk about enough. One is arrogance, and the other is denial. And I think those are both at play in the way we deal with this. So I wrote, I got together with EJI during this initial period. They were starting these soil collections, and I talked to them, and we arranged to do a soil collection in Towson. One of the things I learned early on in this was that there was a lynching that had occurred a mile and a half from where I live, right? No idea. So it was almost about, I'm just looking at the date, February 2018. So it was almost 6 years ago to the day that we had this soil collection. And this, by the way, was the only really publicity that we had. It was an article that appeared in the Sun that morning. It doesn't really even say the time. And that was deliberate, because I didn't know what to expect. This is all new to me, and I didn't know what kind of backlash there might be or what. But despite the fact that we didn't publicize it, a bunch of people showed up. We had a couple dozen people show up. And so here are This is the scene. This is right next to the old county jail in Towson. Some of you may be familiar with the building. And I just want to mention that on the back there, this woman who's second from the left, standing behind, that's her daughter actually, is a woman by the name of Jenny Lyles. And she's a public historian. And she, after this ceremony, became very interested in learning more about Howard Cooper. And so she got to work and looking up whatever she could find, and she's incredibly resourceful and brilliant. And so she was able to actually, in very short order, find census records that relating to Howard Cooper. And now, I just want to mention again, Howard Cooper was lynched in July of 1885. At the time, the contemporary press that we can see in the newspapers and everything, they referred to him as anywhere between 19 and 25 years old, a brute, the usual tropes that we associate with this kind of accounting. So she found the census records, and here are the census records. You can see that it was written on the 19th, taken on the 19th of July, 1870 rather, so 15 years before Howard Cooper was lynched. And what you can see here, Howard Cooper listed with living with his grandparents, his mother Henrietta, an aunt Celeste Henry, who's his twin, but he's listed as 6 months old, which means at the time that he was lynched, he couldn't have been older than 15 years old. He couldn't have been older. And, that's chilling, right? I mean, it's all chilling, but that we can document that, a child was murdered in Towson is just, it's terrifying, it's horrifying. And so shortly after this ceremony, we incorporated the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, and we start with, this is the premise, that more than 6,500 Black Americans were lynched in the United States between those years, and we know of at least 38 in Maryland. There's no doubt that there were more, but there are 38 that we can document. And before, you may have remembered that I had said 4,500. Well, between the time that that report was originally written and today, EJI has actually expanded the parameters of the range of years that it looked at, and they did another report on Reconstruction, and they discovered at least 2,000 more. So, as Roxanne mentioned, we are a 5013, and these are our goals that she was able to communicate. And one of the things I like to do when I'm doing this is, show you the names of all of these. I was going to say men, but there's a couple of children in there. In addition to Howard Cooper in 1885, Frederick Pierce, 1861 there, the third one. He was a 13-year-old slave, Cecil County. So I hope you'll just kind of run your eyes over these names and let them register. These are all victims of murders that are unsolved. No one was ever arrested, no one was ever convicted for any of these murders. You can see that they occurred over the span of about 80 years. Most of them happened within 70% of them. 27 of the 83 happened in that 30-year span, and that includes the three victims we know of in Harford County: Isaac Moore, Jim Quinn, and Lewis Harris. So here's just a kind of a distillation of what we know about these Harford County victims. Isaac Moore, we know, was accused with another man of assaulting a daughter of William Oldfield, which is a name that may be familiar to many in this area, called a highly respectable citizen of Harford County. He was being taken before a judge, and he was hanged, summarily hanged right then. And you notice that the assault and the lynching all occurred on the same day. There was no delay. The next that we know of is Jim Quinn, and this happened in Whitehall. He was accused of assaulting an elderly woman in Baltimore City. He went to Pennsylvania to escape. They found him and they put him on a train and meant to take him to Towson Jail. But when the train got to Whitehall, 30 men boarded, removed him from the train, and as the paper said, the lynchers hanged him to the first convenient tree without even the vaguest form of a trial. That was in 1869. And then, are we okay, Tim? Okay. And then the most recent was 1900, Lewis Harris, right here in Bel Air, accused of assaulting a woman, got to her home, I think, in something at 4 in the morning is what the newspaper said, and assaulted her. Similar incident had occurred several months earlier. Again, the sheriff had planned to transfer Harris to Baltimore City, and but the mob from Aberdeen apparently exchanged gunfire with the sheriff, broke into the jail, and they hanged him from a nearby tree. Those are the three in Harford County that we know of. And just to give you an idea where the others occurred all over the state and how many there were, you see that Anne Arundel had the most with 5, although one of them, the King Johnson lynching, happened in Brooklyn, which is now part of Baltimore City, but at the time it was part of Anne Arundel. And we know that lynchings occurred in 17 of Maryland's 24 counties, 23 counties in Baltimore City, 24 jurisdictions. Those counties that are listed in red, those are counties where there is some form of either coalition or some organization that is looking at, doing this work of documenting and remembering these lynchings. Only 3 remain, but we're working on it, all right, in Carolyn, Queen Anne's, and Calvert. So I do want to show you a little film now, and it's really about the most recent lynching that occurred that we know of, and that is the lynching of George Armwood in Princess Anne in 1933. And one of the things that because it's the most recent, it's the lynching for which we have the most available evidence, and so that makes it a story worth telling. But it also displayed a lot of the characteristics that are common to all of these lynchings, and so I'll put that on right now. Just let me know if you can't hear it.
They beat him, and they stabbed him, and they hung him, and they set him on fire.
They knew in advance what was going to happen.
Their decision to take him away from the safety of Baltimore City was a tragic mistake.
They didn't think a black man's life was worth anything.
Like the rest of the country, the 1930s were a difficult time in Maryland.
With the Depression, families, and it didn't matter whether they were black or white, most people were in dire economic straits.
And in the 30s, the Eastern Shore was predominantly agricultural and absolutely segregated. Jim Crow was alive and well in the 30s on the shore.
The threat to blacks on the shore was magnified by anger over the case of Ewell Lee, a black man also known as Orphan Jones. In January of 1932, Lee was convicted of murdering a white family of 4 in Berlin. Lee's lawyer was Bernard Adis, a communist from Baltimore. He not only got Lee's original conviction reversed, but managed to drag the case on for years, infuriating whites.
He was despised on the lower shore, even though he was a tremendously effective defense attorney for his client.
In October of 1933, the Lee case was still unresolved when an elderly woman named Mary Denston said she was attacked by a black man while walking home near Princess Anne. She said she didn't know her assailant, but would be able to identify him among 1,000. Word of the attack spread quickly. Soon, hundreds of men from 3 counties joined the manhunt. The man they were hunting was George Armwood, a 22-year-old farm worker who lived near Pocomoke City.
My grandmother's name is Mary Armwood. You know, it was her family, it was her relative, and she was there.
Tina's grandmother had fond memories of her cousin.
He would come by a lot, and he seemed like a really nice guy. He was always smiling, he was very friendly, and she said he used to whistle a lot.
When he was 15, George left school to live and work with a white man on a nearby farm. Armwood, the Afro learned, was reared by a white family and recognized by many to be feeble-minded and a fit subject for a psychopathic ward. He was not put in one because, in spite of his mental infirmity, or because of it, he was a good workman and an inexpensive one. Even before Mrs. Denston had a chance to identify him, Armwood was named as her attacker. It's not clear why.
I'm not sure that Armwood committed a crime at all. From what we know, and the fact that he was described as being dim-witted, I'm not sure if he committed a crime. When you're looking for someone to blame for something, you find a scapegoat. The weakest victim, the weakest person you can find, and you choose that person.
Whatever the reason, Armwood was a wanted man. The search intensified, and the next day, an armed posse entered the Armwood home, demanding to know where George was.
And then they started threatening them, telling them that if, they didn't give him up and if they knew where he was, that they would hurt all of them. Eventually, they seen him being drugged out of the woods. And she said that they pulled him out and they were beating on him, and then they tied him to the back of a car and made him walk.
In a time of anxiety and anger, Armwood's capture was like lighting a fuse.
The Yule Lee case was still very much in the headlines, but here comes George Armwood, another African American accused of a crime against a white woman.
They had just lynched Matt Williams 2 years prior to. And then also the people in Worcester County were still in uproar because what happened to Earl Lee, we call him Orphan Jones, because it took 2 years before he was brought to justice, and they wanted it to happen immediately.
Armwood was first taken to the Princess Anne jail, but fearing trouble, police took him to the Wicomico jail in Salisbury, the very place where Matthew Williams was lynched not 2 years earlier. As news of Armwood's capture spread, angry crowds began to gather. It was clear he wasn't safe in Salisbury either, so Governor Albert Ritchie ordered state police to take Armwood away from the shore altogether. Just as Armwood was let out the back door, the mob burst through the front. From Salisbury, Armwood was taken first to Cecil County and then to the Baltimore City Jail, where it was reported he signed a confession. In Baltimore, Armwood was out of the reach of shore mobs, but the respite was short-lived.
Judge Robert Dewar ordered that Armwood be returned to the Somerset County Jail after he had been assured by Sheriff Luther Daugherty and by State's Attorney John Robbins that they had everything under control. I could not understand why Judge Dewar would do such a thing because he was a circuit court judge. He wasn't a law enforcement officer. I found out later from his granddaughter that Judge Dewar was up for re-election the next fall.
Robbins told Ritchie the danger of violence had passed. He said Somerset County is law-abiding and peaceful. Judge Dewar also assured the governor, but he may have been more concerned with assuring his constituents.
Judge Dewar realized that if he didn't bring Armwood back, it would be considered a repudiation of his own community. So to his shame, he had him come back.
Ritchie also faced re-election, so he agreed, and at 10 o'clock that night, a convoy of state police left Baltimore with Armwood in tow. When the sun came up on October 18th, George Armwood was sitting in a cell at the Princess Anne jail. Everyone on the shore knew it. His return was trumpeted in the papers and on the radio. Predictably, the jail attracted the curious and the furious. People arrived by the hundreds. The danger was clear and growing. The troopers who brought Armwood back stayed to guard the jail, but there were only 25, and the mob now numbered in the thousands. The American Legion refused to provide reinforcements, and Robbins refused to allow Armwood to be returned to Baltimore. Reports of unrest soon reached the governor. Again, Ritchie called Robbins and Dewar, and again, each man assured him that Armwood was safe. But with every minute, the mob was getting larger and more menacing. At 7 o'clock, Dewar went to the jail himself to talk to the angry crowd.
The judge confronted the mob and said, I know all of you. I know most of you. Now, let's just go home. We're going to try him and let the law take its course.
And there were shouts from the mob, well, what if ATIS comes over? There was this prevailing attitude in the lower shore that if something was not done quickly, this lawyer ATIS will do the same thing here that he did in Worcester County, and we're not going to have that.
After speaking to the mob, Dewar got back in his car and left for dinner, thinking the crisis was over. He was mistaken. No sooner had the judge left when the crowd advanced at the badly outnumbered troopers. As they surged forward, the police closed ranks at the jail entrance. Rocks and bricks started flying. The police answered with tear gas. The smoke had the desired effect, but was quickly dispersed by the wind, and the crowd, still growing in number and frenzy, pressed in. The police were armed, but never fired a shot. Instead, there was hand-to-hand combat at the entrance. Some men brought heavy rails and rammed the gate repeatedly until it finally gave way at 8:30. A howl arose from the mob when the gate went down. Armwood was found hiding under the mattress in his cell on the second floor. He was dragged outside, a noose already around his neck. The frenzied mob taunted and beat the helpless prisoner. A boy of 18 cut Armwood's ear off and waved it around. It was described as a bloody carnival in which men, women, and even children took part.
Yes, it was a family affair. It wasn't just men, but it was women. And they knew in advance what was going to happen.
To show their contempt for Dewar, they dragged Armwood behind the truck to the judge's home, hoping to hang him there. One estimate put the size of the mob at 5,000 people, almost 6 times the population of Princess Anne itself. Finding no suitable tree at Judge Dewar's home, they chose a tall oak nearby. The mob shrieked as they yanked Armwood up and let him drop several times. Then they let him hang for 5 minutes. When they cut him down, Armwood was dead, but the spectacle wasn't over.
And they drug his body around for everyone to see. And then she says, I remember, them dragging his body through the neighborhood and, and everyone in the house, of course, crying and being really upset.
Finally, Armwood's body was dragged to the courthouse. It was doused with gasoline and set afire. The crowd was so deep, the police couldn't get through. A visitor described the stench of burning flesh and a mob of men, women, boys, and girls dancing and singing around the burning body as if in celebration. The rope was cut into small pieces and given away as souvenirs. Armwood's charred body was finally dumped in front of a lumberyard where it lay in the street for hours. It became an iconic image memorialized on the front page of the Afro-American newspapers. A young reporter named Clarence Mitchell Jr. was sent to the scene.
When we got down there, the crowd was there. They had actually completed the lynching at the time, but the body was
They shoot him or hang him?
They hanged and then poured gasoline on the body and set it on fire. And there was a riot out there in the middle of the street.
How'd you feel though when you saw this?
Well, it was a revolting sight. There's no doubt about that. I see a fellow human lying there in the middle of the street in that kind of a condition.
Here's how Mitchell described the scene in print.
The skin of George Armwood was scorched and blackened, while his face had suffered many blows from sharp and heavy instruments. A cursory glance revealed that one ear was missing, and his tongue between his clenched teeth gave evidence of his great agony before death. There is no adequate description of the mute evidence of gloating on the part of whites who gathered to watch the effect upon our people.
Mary Denston never did identify Armwood as her assailant, yet thousands of people took part in his murder, which was enabled by a few.
This was what Judge Dewar, he and the governor at the time were complicit in. They represented the establishment, and they didn't think a black man's life was worth anything.
For his part, Governor Ritchie responded with outrage, saying, "I am shocked beyond expression at this horrible lynching."
It's a little disingenuous of Ritchie to claim that he didn't know that there was a possibility that this would occur. Anyone with any knowledge of previous events knew that this was a great risk.
Ritchie placed responsibility for the lynching squarely on the shoulders of Judge Dewar and State's Attorney Robbins.
So there was a clear effort on the governor's part to place the blame on other men as opposed to taking that responsibility himself.
Judge Dewar admitted, "I was badly mistaken in my judgment, and I am deeply grieved that such a thing happened in our county." His remorse was met with skepticism by the Baltimore press. Robbins, on the other hand, was mum. To the many questions he faced, he had but one response: "I have no statement to make at this time." Newspapers around the country registered disbelief and disgust at the events in Maryland. It was a stain on the state and its governor. Under fire, Ritchie ordered Attorney General Lane to investigate the crime at once. 9 suspects were identified, but in Maryland at that time, charges could only be brought by the county state's attorney, and Robbins refused to arrest anyone.
So the governor actually, in effect, declared martial law, sent the Maryland militia to Salisbury, to the armory in Salisbury, where they fanned out and actually apprehended 4 alleged leaders of the lynch mob.
The locals were incensed and gathered at the armory trying to intimidate the troops and prevent the arrests. They didn't succeed. The 4 men were rushed to Baltimore and were returned to the shore to face charges.
State's Attorney Robbins said, "Judge, I don't have any evidence against these men, so I've got nothing to charge them with," whereupon the judge dismissed the case. So the Armwood lynching, just as the Matthew Williams lynching, went without anyone being charged.
Yeah, so basically nothing happened. So business as usual. But someone had lost their life. Family members lost a loved one.
And despite their efforts to placate shore voters, both Ritchie and Dewar lost their re-election bids the next year. The community continues to suffer.
President and Todd of Somerset County are still reaping the results of that incident. We have a serious racial divide that still exists in our county.
And until we get to the point of talking about it, talking about what brought it about and the aftermath of it, nothing's going to be done. There's that huge gap. There's no understanding of each other. And until we get to that point, lynching is going to have, it's like a stab in the heart.
So it's hard to come back from after seeing something like that. I've seen this dozens of times since it was made, and it doesn't get any easier. That was 90 something years ago now, right? 91 years ago. And I still think, you can draw a straight line, right, between Armwood's lynching, the other racial terror lynchings, and that happened in our history, and a straight line between those lynchings and white cops, right, shooting black people in the back, or while they're in bed, or kneeling on their throats in broad daylight. And I think the line that connects all of these crimes is impunity. It's this arrogance. There's a certain comfort in this behavior. There's an assumption of legitimacy that no one's going to do anything about it. And so it's incumbent on us to remember these crimes for what they were, and to tell the truth about it. Right, Brian Stevenson talks about truth and reconciliation as being sequential, that there can be no reconciliation until we acknowledge and embrace the truth. And I like to think that our work, the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, we're the truth part of that equation. And so an important part of what we do is these community remembrance projects I mentioned in the past. So there's the soil collections. This was in Montgomery County a couple of years ago. This was the one in Brooklyn, Maryland. And then you had a wonderful event here not that long ago as well. And this is from that day. And then, as you may know, all of this, or many of these jars of soil, which are being collected all over the country, from all over the country, they're on display at the EJI Legacy Museum. And I can tell you, I was actually there a couple of months ago, and I counted 13 of the jars of Maryland victims that were there. And it's moving, it's important. And then in addition to the soil collection, there's the putting up these historic markers. This was the first kind of a ceremony that preceded the first of the EJI markers in Maryland. This was in Anne Arundel County. And I used to point to this slide and say, this is what social change looks like, right here. You've got, in a county where there were five lynchings, you had hundreds of people come out, hundreds of people, to mark this occasion, to confront the truth, and to begin to try and achieve the healing that can lead to reconciliation. And so that was there. That's the marker that went up that day. This was in Towson, the Howard Cooper, that story I told you about earlier, with a 15-year-old child. And this was it's actually not the most recent one. This was the most recent EJI marker. This is in St. Mary's County. And then there's a third element a third thread of these community remembrance projects that EJI has talked about, and that is to bring home replicas of, this is the monument to memorial to lynching victims. It's in Montgomery. I'm sure you've all seen this before. And there are kind of replicas of all of those. Each one of those columns represents a county where lynching occurred. And the names of the victims are inscribed on it. And there's a duplicate set of these smaller, but that surround the memorial. And the idea is that at some point the people will, for instance, from Harford County will go down there, claim the memorial column that belongs to it, and then return it and have it installed in a prominent place. Here's the one that's there for Howard Cooper for Baltimore County. I think we're going to move. I was going to. So, one thing is that that I did want to mention is that we talk about these numbers that are unfathomable, but it's important that our memory shouldn't be abstract and general in this way, but rather immediate and specific. Howard Cooper was not just one of 38 in Maryland or 6,500 in the United States, right? He was of his community, just as the 3 victims in Harford County, known to those people who murdered him. The lynching not only, it hurt his family and his friends, and obviously he had people who loved him and people who he loved, and this terror that these lynchings incurred extended to the entire community, right? Not just the people who he loved, not just the people who knew him, but to people who didn't know him or his family, right? They certainly understood the message of what was being conveyed that day, and so it's a really powerful experience to stand where these things occurred, to be there. There's a power of place that can't be overstated. So let me just see. I know we're getting short on time, and so why do we do this? So first of all, we need to change the narrative, right, around the race in this country. These ceremonies focus attention on this neglected history, and by forcing the subject into the public square. And most people are unaware of the scale and the sadism that were on display in these lynchings, and of the what we did. This is racial terror. This was what we did to our own people. We inflicted this on our own people. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to confront it, know what happened, and acknowledge it. And these community remembrance projects, I think, are wonderful ways, very moving ways, to help communities confront that uncomfortable truth and where they live. And it's not about pointing fingers. It's really about telling the truth. And acknowledging this history also, I think, can foster insight into the ways that the devastation of lynching continues to be manifest in our lives. We know that there are long-term hereditary and physical and psychic trauma that this legacy has inflicted. We know, for instance, look at the experience with COVID, the incidents and mortality and the vaccination experience, right? Who is it that gets hurt the most? That's not an accident. That's not a coincidence. Voting suppression, that's a pretty obvious one, right? The January 6th, insurrection. That is, that is a racist. Racism-motivated, crime movement, and you can't. It's hard to deny that. I think the more we see. So, and then another thing is that we want to kind of dismantle the apparatus of white supremacy. Right? We want to become sensitized to it, not just that it happens, but to be able to see it happening. Right? To understand how it works and to be deliberate about disassembling it, about taking it down. And so I think these projects, these community remembrance projects, it sensitizes us to recognize white supremacy when it's on display, and it's not always obvious. And I think it also, helps us develop a capacity for empathy. And I think finally, recognizing these murders in a solemn and public manner. It honors and dignifies the lives of these victims, and I think it strengthens communities by bringing us together for a common and an honorable and a just purpose. So I think that's where I'm going to stop right now, because I know we're getting close to the end. So I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
No.
Oh, yes, sorry.
So I believe we actually have a truth and reconciliation process ongoing in the state of Maryland. Is that not true?
We have a commission that is, yes, there's a truth and I was actually going to show you a slide because we're often confused for that commission that exists. Yeah, we're the first and I think still the only state in the United States that has created this Truth and Reconciliation Commission around lynchings. So yeah, they are going to be having public hearings. They've had 5 already. Others are being planned. And the idea is that they having these hearings in communities where they occurred. Yeah, idea is to kind of take a measure of the damage that's been done, take testimony from people who have been affected, and then ultimately the commission is supposed to make recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly on the best way to respond.
So my question is, I have been following this, and it is a leap forward for people of African American descent to be able to claim the huge psychotic damage that was done to them in their community by lynching. I have yet to see a white person who was part of the lynching process also.
Well, remember yeah.
Get you to restate our question.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So the question was about the failure of a white person to be a part of, or to
be part of the Truth and Reconciliation.
Yeah, to put the Truth and Reconciliation. Well, that's not true. First of all, let's remember this was the last lynching in Maryland. This was 90-something years ago, right? 91 years ago. But an amazing thing happened in the Baltimore County hearing, which was a couple of years ago in June. The woman who I talked about before, Jenny Lyles, who did the research on Howard Cooper and found his family in the census and everything, she actually was able to trace his family back to Harford County. Interesting. But in her work, she was actually able to identify and make contact with the great-great-granddaughter of the man who led the lynch mob that murdered Howard Cooper. And she spoke at the hearing there, and I'm telling you, I gasp every time I think of it. It was incredibly powerful. And on our website, we have an excerpts of some of the testimony from hearings that year. And I would seek it out because it's one of the most powerful moments I've ever experienced, to tell you the truth. And she's very involved. And there are others involved elsewhere as well. But as a rule, you're absolutely right. It's lacking. But here's a chance for people to do that. And there's a lot of denial, not just in the white community. A lot of black people don't want to be reminded of this either. Won't have anything to do with it. So, yes, ma'am.
From an education perspective, with all that is going on to eliminate the history, just the history, how involved in this project are you with the school systems?
Well, it depends on the county. Some counties are more, I'm sorry, the question was, how involved are we with educational systems in telling this history? So some counties are much more receptive than others. I know there are issues in Harford County. And I know that Moms for, whatever it's called, Moms for Liberty, which has really been labeled a hate group by the Southern Law and Poverty Center, something like that. I know this is one of the counties they're active in Maryland, so that's the problem. We will always respond, and if people want to hear us, I just got a message yesterday from a high school in Patapsco High School. So we are, and it's an important part of the curriculum in some places. Many of the coalitions are put on these creative arts contests where they do, they invite students, high school students generally, to do not only poetry, but essays, visual art, things like that. And PG County has really taken off on this. They've got like $5,000 worth of prizes this year alone. So, it's embraced by the school system there. But so it is something that is ongoing, and that is the value of doing this thing. Is we need to make it. We need to make it a topic of conversation. We need to acknowledge it. It needs to be part of what we talk about to each other. Right? Yes, someone back there?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, the video you showed, is that currently available online via PBS?
So it's not online PBS, but it's on our website. It's on our YouTube channel. If you go to the YouTube, Maryland, if you go Howard or George Armwood, it'll pop up. I mean, I was just telling Iris before, that video was made for our first conference, which is in 2018. And this has just been incredible. So we did another video the following year, the one on Howard Cooper, and you could find that as well. So since then, the two videos alone have been seen nearly 100,000 times. Yikes, right? I mean, I think there is an appetite for truth-telling. Yes, ma'am.
So what is the website to which you?
So our website is mdlynchingmemorial.org, and it's actually, there's pamphlets over here. They'll have it. Yeah, it'll be on there. I know I do a bad job of publicizing that. But then the YouTube thing is, you can always just find YouTube. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I was struck by your map that there were 16 jurisdictions in Maryland that had active research ongoing, which means there's 7 or 8, depending on how you want to count it, that don't.
So,
and some of those, looking at the map, and some of which I know well, I know have to have been sites of lynchings. It would have been culturally impossible for
right.
that to happen.
So the question had to do with counties that were not identified as having lynching or ongoing efforts, but which certainly had lynchings. Yes. What the map showed was the 17 jurisdictions where we have documented lynchings, and 14 of those have active efforts. But there are actually efforts in Dorchester County, for instance, I know of, and other places, because yes, it's common sense that these occurred elsewhere as well. And even if they didn't occur elsewhere, it's still important to acknowledge this, to recognize it, and to become engaged. Yes?
First of all, thank you for what you were doing. And my question, I'm relatively new with all this, is you may not have the answer, the Historical Society might. Where is Harford County with creating historical markers at these sites? Can you address that, or can?
So the question.
That's something that's not in the works yet.
So
put you on the spot.
the question was if whether or not Harford County has done anything about historical markers, and I just was having this conversation with Iris right before we started today. Was that there are no markers yet, but I think it's a wonderful time to start that effort. It's never not a good time. And I'll tell you the truth. The one in Anne Arundel County, the first one that they did, that was for 5. That recognized the 5 lynchings that happened there. I kind of think, and this is just personally, that it's good to do multiple markers. There are 3 victims in Harford County. I would like to see a marker dedicated for each one of them. And that the more eyeballs that get there, the more times the subject is brought into the news, where you can open the newspaper, the Aegis, and see that there's a marker installation happening this weekend. Oh, and then the next 6 months down the line, oh, here's another one. It normalizes the conversation. And I think that helps. Honestly, I have become much more optimistic about all of this since I started. And because change is happening. People are, you're all here. People are interested in this, and I think that's despite the despair that we see in the rest of our lives, and certainly our political lives. I'm just going to share something. I'm just going to share it now because here it is. Because your question makes me think of it, and this is something that was. That I came across a while ago, and it's easy to be overwhelmed by the enormity of this. It is so depressing. It is so depressing. But here's something that helped me at least, and this is from the Talmud. And it says, you can read it yourselves, but it says, "Don't be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You're not obliged to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." And so that is kind of the spirit, I think, that guides me, at least, and a lot of us. Along these lines, I did a program years ago on the effort to get a man to Mars, to get space flight to Mars, get somewhere on Mars. And it's like an incredible, complex thing, all of these timelines weaving in and out, going generations, and it's so intricate and so preposterous. I mean, it's so bold, it's so audacious. Who would even think of that? And then I asked, when we did the show, we asked one of the scientists, the NASA scientist, really, and what he likened it to was building a cathedral. He said when those grand cathedrals were being constructed, no one was under the illusion they would live to see it finished, but everyone did their part because they were committed. They believed in the value, in the beauty, and in the they had faith. And so I think of this. This is our turn. It's our turn now. Are we going to see the day when we walk in the garden of racial reconciliation? I won't. But we have a part we can do now. So.
Yeah, my name is Tremaine Smith, and in the spirit of not abandoning it, I'm here with my sister, and we knew that our grandfather, who grew up in Baltimore, was a stone cold racist, and we looked into more about it, and his family was from Harford County. And so we spent the last several years doing genealogy to discover that our ancestors enslaved people in Harford County. And their names were the Whiteford's and the Streets. And the Streets. Yeah. And so we would like to join in whatever efforts we can in Harford County, even though I'm from Philadelphia.
And I'm from Montgomery County, Maryland.
And my brother's in Baltimore. But I came today in order to try to meet more people in Harford County and to see how we can move forward.
Yeah. These two ladies right here. Anyone else? I think we're good. All right. Well, thank you very much for your patience. Sure.